Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session where we're going to be focusing on selecting your methodology and also the research design. And we're going to specifically be looking at qualitative research. So this is a two-part session. And in today's session, we're going to be looking at the methodology, qualitative methodology, and all the things that are entailed there. And then when we move to part two, which will happen tomorrow, we will then focus specifically on the research design. Okay, so let's get started. All right. Okay, so we're going to be looking at selecting your methodology tonight, as I said. And one of the first things that I would like us to look at is this idea of a paradigm. So when you're doing research, how you determine the way in which you're going to go about your research, our methodologies are very, very important because they are the driver of the research that we're doing. They assist you to be able to test your hypothesis. They assist you to be able to answer your research question. So the data that you're going to be collecting will assist you to be able to achieve your aims and objectives. So it's very, very critical that as you select your methodology, that you also ensure that it's aligned with the question that you're asking. Is this methodology going to help you, to assist you to be able to answer the research question that you have? Okay, so we then start broadly with the philosophical overview of research methodologies and some of the conversations, politics, challenges, engagements around what counts as knowledge. How do you determine what counts as knowledge, and how these then determine whether you will lean towards quantitative research or lean towards qualitative research. Now, paradigms. A paradigm determines how you view the world. So the way in which you view the world will also lead you to the kinds of questions that you're going to ask, right? So what are the things that keep you awake at night? And how do you make meaning of those things? What are some of the things that you're curious about? And how would you like to go about learning more, understanding more, and getting more information about that which you're curious about, right? So those kinds of questions and the ways in which, or the direction in which you're leaning will assist you to decide what method to use for your research. So what is it that you view as reality, right? Is reality fixed? Is reality determined by circumstances, by the environment, by situation, by history? How do we understand reality as we know it today? So how you view reality will also then play a critical role in terms of the questions that you're asking in your research, right? And then what is viewed as knowledge and truth? Is there an absolute truth? How do we understand truth in terms of how we understand or come to know the world? And what counts as knowledge, and what knowledge matters? So all of these will then determine what method will be applicable or relevant for you in the research that you're doing. So you'll then choose your research, or rather your method, dependent on how you view the world and how you view our understanding of what knowledge is, right? And how we understand truth. And that will then lead you or take you towards the road of the method that you're going to be using. And then just continuing on this as well, is this idea of ontology. And ontology is the nature of reality, or what is called the theory of existence. So how we understand reality, how we understand how we come to be in the world, how we understand the relations, interconnectedness, how things affect one another, how things impact one another, how things correlate with one another, how things engage with one another, and existence of us as human beings, but also existence of other things that are not human. So that is ontology. It's about the nature of reality. It's about how we understand existence, right? So that theory of what is real in the world. And then epistemology. Epistemology is how do we know the world? So here it's about knowledge. Yesterday, when we were focusing on decolonization, we spent a bit of time engaging on this idea of epistemology, right? And how there are various forms of epistemologies, and how some epistemologies have been privileged at the expense of others. So how do we come to know the world? What influences our theory of knowledge? What influences what we then come to know as true or not, right? So other epistemologies over a long period of time were deemed as irrelevant, as inferior, and therefore as not containing the truth. So there was only a particular way of understanding the world and coming to know what truth is. And so when we start reimagining and rethinking and understanding that there are many epistemologies and not just one epistemology, then that also influences how we come to know the world. Okay, and all these things play a critical role in terms of how you then go about doing your research, how you go about taking the various steps of the approach, the design, how you collect your data, how you conduct your experiments. All of those are determined by the ways in which you understand how we come to know the world. Okay. And then the method, of course, the methodology, how we then gain knowledge. How are you going to answer that research question? How are you going to test or prove or disprove that hypothesis? How are you going to gain that knowledge? You're going to gain that knowledge through using a particular method. Okay, so paradigms have been understood over time in different ways. And again, this is determined by what we come to know as reality, as the truth. And for a very long time in the academic world, what was privileged was the positivist paradigm, because it was believed to be the true science, right? So positivist paradigm, the reality of the world or truth is based on the real reality. It's based on the scientific reality. It needs to be proven beyond doubt scientifically. And it's about the search for certainty, right? The searching for certainty. You want to be certain that 1 + 1 = 2. It's not 2.5 or 1.5 or 11, it's 2. So that's certainty, and how you get to that certainty, what kind of processes or what kind of steps gets you to the answer that you want to get to, right? And then epistemology within a positivist paradigm, it's about getting to producing knowledge that is based on facts, knowledge that is based on causality, causes and effects of things, right? So it's about coming up with universal law, if you will, a law that underlines regularities of true findings. You want to do an experiment, you want to do research where objectivity is the core, where it's about absolute knowledge. Is the world or the earth round? Is it flat? So those kinds of engagements, and how do you come to that truth? How do you come to that conclusion of the research or of the work that you're doing? How do you come to that conclusion? And here, of course, the methodologies that would go with the positivist paradigm would be your quantitative. You do experimental research, you do testing, so you run tests, and you predict, right? So you do experiments, you test, you predict, you control, and then the idea is that you are seeking also for generalizability, right? Can this be generalized in another context? Can this be generalizable to the whole population of South Africa, for example? And then on the other side, we have constructivist or interpretivist paradigm. So what is this paradigm? This paradigm is saying that reality can be understood not only from one view or from one lens, but reality is determined by our interpretation of the world, right? It's how the world is constructed based on lived realities, based on experience, based on history, and how these then become interpreted. That then determines what we deem as reality, right? So think about how social media influences people. Think about the world that we're living in right now with AI and the ways in which it's influencing the way in which we understand the world, and how there's this shift and movement from one side to the other, back to the other side, right? So constructivist paradigm says that this reality is constructed through human interactions. So our engagements with one another every day determines how we then come to see, understand, and experience the world. And then this will obviously influence what we then come to know, how we understand what truth is. So it's based on interpretation. So there can be multiple truths. There can be multiple realities, depending on one's perspective or view of the world or experience. Within psychology, for example, we speak about normal, in inverted commas, and abnormal, and that people who come into the world and experience it in a particular way that is not the norm, they are then diagnosed as being different, right? So the way in which they understand the world, the way in which they interpret the world is very different from the way in which we regularly or normally understand the world, right? So think of an example of someone who's autistic, right? So the way in which an autistic person interprets the world would be very different from the way that perhaps I would interpret the world, right? So their view of reality, the reality that is in front of them, the way that they see the truth, is interpreted because of the ways in which their brains are wired, if you will, right? So does that mean that their reality is not real? Of course not. Their reality is also real. So there are multiple ways in which we can come to be in the world and understand the world. And this is what interpretivist paradigm then seeks to do. And what assists us in terms of the methodologies for this is qualitative methodology, where we've got case studies for, as an example, there are many others, and then understanding and interpreting of particular contexts based on various experiences that we have. Okay. And then continuing still with the paradigms, also very much similar or linked to the one that I've just spoken about in terms of constructivists, taking it further from the individual experience of the world, their lived realities, taking it to what are the other things that informs these lived realities? What are the things that informs the ways in which I see the world? And this is what we call the critical or emancipatory paradigm. So here reality is shaped by what? Reality is shaped by our histories. It's shaped by our social relations, social interactions. It's also shaped by politics, our political values and economic values. This year is one of those very interesting years in the world where many countries, I think, if I'm not correct, I heard that 90 countries having their elections this year, right? So, and if you think about the moment of elections and the anticipations and the expectations and how all of those, right, those values, those decisions shape the ways in which reality comes to be. So people become anxious, people become expectant, people become hopeful because of the expectations that they have on the political powers, how our world is influenced by economic values as well. Our world and reality is shaped by history because, again, as the colonized people, for example, colonialism has come to shape who we are as a people and how we view the world. And that is why, again, at the same time, the project or process of decolonization becomes important to say, how do we reimagine this history? How do we understand that history in how that history influences our reality today, how we engage with each other today? Why is it important that we ensure that we have the right president in power? What are the implications of that? Why is that something that's important, right? So that's ontology. That's how we come to understand the world. And it's a critical lens in understanding our lived realities and engagements with the world and each other. And this will inform, again, the knowledge and truth, right? Social media plays a critical role in how people understand knowledge and truth, but also the politics of the day also very much shapes what we come as reality, understand as reality and knowledge. So we understand events, the world around us, in this social and economic context. So what do we mean when we're saying we're living in a neoliberal moment? What do we mean when we're saying that we are living in a capitalist system? What does that mean in terms of how capital or capitalism influences the way in which we move in the world? What you can afford, what you cannot afford, where you can go, where you cannot go, and how all of these then shape the way in which you understand the world, right? So the findings within a critical emancipatory paradigms are value mediated. So what are the values? What are the things that influence, that mediate how you come to understand the world? And then, of course, they're socially constructed. And as you can imagine, because of the critical lens or perspective of this paradigm, there would be a lot of controversy in terms of how we then come to make meaning or come to conclusions in terms of the work that we're doing. It's argumentative, right? And the aim at the end of the day is that we want to achieve social justice and we want to achieve emancipation for everybody. So in the question that you're asking in your research, and if you're saying you want to take on an emancipatory paradigm, you do so because you're saying, with this research, right, with this research that I'm doing, I would like to ensure that the results of this research, the data of this research, what's going to come out of this research is going to contribute towards work that pushes forward social justice. What comes out of this research has to contribute towards the emancipation of people, right? So if you're looking at, for example, gender inequality, and you're saying that women are not emancipated or they're not fully emancipated, what are some of the challenges that are confronting women? Why are there such high rates of gender-based violence? So I'm looking at this because I want to have an understanding of why this is happening. What is the cause of this? What is the history of this? And why is it that women do not have access to power like their male counterparts, for example? So I'm doing this research so that we can get an understanding of this, so that we can explore this phenomenon with the aim at the end of the day of ensuring that what we learn from this work can contribute towards the emancipation of women. Okay. So that's how you would or can think about your research. And the methodology that you would use, the design that you would use would be discourse analysis. So discourse analysis moves beyond just content analysis. It moves beyond just thematic analysis. So you're not just looking at the themes that are coming up. You're not just looking at what is the content of this data, but you are critically analyzing the discourses. You are critically looking at the underlying issues that are linked to this phenomena that you are doing research on. So, for example, if you're interested in the emancipation of women, you're going to say, how are the systemic inequalities contributing towards women not being emancipated? What are the systemic issues? How is the gender pay gap contributing towards women not reaching a space where they can live in an equal, equitable world? Right? So the discourse is saying we're not just looking at the inequality, but we're also looking at how is the system creating an enabling environment for the continuation of the inequalities. So even if maybe at a government level, we're talking about equality amongst genders, how can we speak about that equality if women are still continuing to earn less? And if they earn less, then it means that they cannot participate fully, economically, socially, in society, because they do not have the same kinds of resources. So that's how you do a discourse analysis, right? You're not just looking at saying, oh, these are the inequalities, this is what's happening, but you're saying how is the system also contributing towards ensuring this, right? Why is it that South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world? Because the majority of the people, the Black race in South Africa, continues to live in poverty. They continue to not have access to resources. So even as you're doing research on poverty, even as you're doing research on unemployment and saying you want to understand the unemployment challenges that are there in South Africa, you need to understand them from a historical perspective, political perspective, economic perspective, but also the power relations and how all of these contribute towards the rates of unemployment that we have. So that is what critical paralysis you to do in terms of digging deep in the work that you're doing. And some of the ways to do this is also through critical action research, or taking on a feminism view or perspective in the work that you'll be doing. Okay. So the various paradigms, we spoke about positivist, and then we spoke about interpretative or emancipatory, which falls under qualitative, right? So that we have qualitative and quantitative, and over a long period of time, there's been debates and they continue. You know, you come and you're interested in research and you go and you speak to a potential supervisor, and a supervisor tells you, no, I only do quantitative, I can only supervise quantitative, you must do quantitative work. Or you get to a supervisor and the supervisor says, no, I only do qualitative, you must do qualitative, because it's more valuable. And then this side says, no, it's more valuable. This one is not really scientific, for example. So for a very long time, those were the arguments. But there's been many scholars, research, who have grappled with this idea and this issue. And so this question of what is better, is it qualitative or quantitative, is not a useful one in many sense, because there are merits to both. And as I said, it's based on your ontology and epistemology that you take that will determine whether for your research, for you to be able to answer your research questions, or to be able to make sure that you achieve the aims and objectives, you need to be able to know which one is going to assist you to be able to do that, not the other way around, right? So you don't just say, oh, I prefer quantitative, I like quantitative, therefore that's what I'm going to do. No, What is your research question, right? What are the questions that you're asking? And those questions that you're asking will then determine whether it would make sense to do qualitative or quantitative. Both have got value. They've got different strengths and different weaknesses, right? What is it that you want to achieve? Are you interested in generalizability? Are you interested in getting an in-depth understanding of phenomena? What is it that you're interested in? And can this paradigm offer you this or not? So it's important that they must be judged by their own criteria. What is the purpose of doing quantitative research? What is the purpose of doing qualitative research? Okay. And as a result of this, trying to say, but what is the middle ground? So we've got qualitative, we've got quantitative. What are other ways in which we can think about doing research? What are some of the other things that we can think about when we're saying, how do we collect data? What approaches, what methods? And this then gave birth to what is called pragmatism, right? And pragmatism says we need to look and focus on the usefulness of these paradigms, right? Pragmatism says we need to consider mixed methods. So we've indicated that they all have their different strengths and weaknesses. So if perhaps you choose to do a mixed methods, then you are able to attend to these possible weaknesses that you have. So if you were going to do qualitative, because of its strengths that led to a particular point, but there are certain weaknesses that you can attend to those weaknesses by maybe also employing quantitative research, and in that way then have a mixed methods. So you can have them supplementing each other. And when you're using this mixed method, it doesn't necessarily have to be qualitative and quantitative, but even within the methods themselves, you can use different approaches that can assist you to be able to answer the questions that you have. And this is just a snapshot in terms of looking briefly at qualitative and quantitative research. Qualitative is interested in the experience, right? The quality of the experience of the person that you're engaging with. And quantitative is about quantity. It's about frequency, right? How often does this happen? How frequent does this happen? How frequent does this manifest, right? And the magnitude. So that's the focus. And then the philosophical roots, we've just spoken about them, that qualitative is interested in the subjective experience that is influenced by history, that is influenced by the economy of the day, but that is influenced by politics, that people spend sleepless nights saying, oh my goodness, what's going to happen, who's going to be in the cabinet, and what are the implications of that? So those subjective experiences, whereas quantitative is about positivism, right? It's about realism, it's about doing experiments, it's about trying to predict, right? So saying that should the ANC win or should there be a coalition, we predict that in 3 years, this is what's going to be happening in South Africa. In a year, this is what's going to be happening in South Africa. How do we predict how things are going to be based on the way that people vote, based on the way that the coalition take place, right? The decisions that are made. So interested in that broader overview. Whereas with qualitative, we're saying, okay, how are these elections going to influence people's lives? How are these elections going to affect the way in which people experience the world, right? What does it mean in terms of changing people's lives or not? And then the goal is that you want to understand, right? You want to understand the implications of the outcome of the elections, right? You want to describe, you want to derive meaning from how things have turned out. But as I said, with positivism, you want to predict and you want to say, how do we control, right? We're interested in the stability of the economy of the country. And so how do we then do things in such a way that ensures that we can be able to control the ways in which the market moves, right? We know that it's very difficult to control the market. There are things you can put in place, but up to a point, right? There's always the move and shift, and everything that happens influences the market. And or you want to confirm something or you want to test something, right? And then descriptive characteristics of qualitative, there's flexibility there, and it evolves. So it's evolving, it's not fixed. And the understanding or the themes are emergent. So things emerge as you are in the process of finding out, right? So things can change, things can shift. So things do not remain fixed. Whereas with quantitative, there's structure. So things are structured, things are predetermined because they are measured, they are calculated. And then with qualitative, you as the researcher are the instrument. In quantitative, we rely on surveys, we rely on tests. So we use different kinds of instruments to be able to collect the data. Okay, so that was just a broad overview. And this session is about qualitative research, right? There is a different session focusing on quantitative, but I always think it's important for us to understand the different methods broadly in relation to one another, so that even as we zoom in on the research method that you're going to be focusing on, we do this from this broader understanding of why qualitative and what are its philosophical underpinning and principles. So qualitative research is interested, as I've indicated, in the meanings that people make. It's interested in people's lived experiences. How do these experiences shape, influence how people make decisions, how people understand the world, how people form relationships, how people move in the world, engage in their workplaces? So all of those things is what qualitative research is interested in. And then also beyond the individual lived experiences, it's also about perceptions. What are people's perceptions on particular issues in the world around them, right? And how do these influence how people form their identities? So it's about complexities of identity. You cannot just say you understand a person, because a person is shaped by their environment, by their family, by their community, by their past experiences. So all of those things, the multiplicity of who a person is at work, at home, at church, all of those things form a critical role in how an individual then constructs their identity. So it's about understanding all these complexities. That's what you want to do as a qualitative researcher. And of course, the nuances, the nitty-gritties of how one comes to form their identity. How do all these things that I've just mentioned influence the formation of one's identity? And then understanding also the politics of identity, right? That it can be fluid, it can be it can change over time based on experiences, based on encounters, based on just lived realities. So the politics of identity as well. It's about exploring the social and cultural world that is around us. So from the individual to the world, to the environment, and to the interaction between all these different stakeholders or role players, if you will. Okay, so what is qualitative research view of the subject? What is it exactly that we're interested in? What is it that we think we can do by conducting qualitative research? And what do we assume when we focus on the perspectives? What are people's perspectives? What is the person's point of view? What are their lived experiences? So based on these, what do we then assume? How do we make meaning? All these things influence the way in which we then come into doing the research that we do. So it's about the authority of experience. So qualitative researchers or research puts experience at the center, right? It's a person's experience. This is my experience. This is what I've gone through. This is what I've seen in my experience. This is how people behave, engage, interact, how one comes into a relationship based on the experience that I have. So it's very much based on this subjective reality of one's experience. Okay. And you know that this experience is not isolated, right? It's mediated by many things around it. Is it pure or is it mediated? Is the experience influenced by other things, or is it just the experience as the person says they perceive the world, or are other things also mediating this, right? And the narration, the telling, the encounters, you as a researcher with the person that you're conducting research alongside with or on, are involved in the process of telling and retelling. So when you're talking about someone's experience, you're talking about something that has happened, an encounter that has already passed or ongoing. So therefore, the encounter is about the retelling of something. And the question is the account true? And if we're saying we're interested in the subjective experience, then the account is true as experienced by that person, right? Again, going back a little bit to how do we understand qualitative research and its rules or laws of logic, right? How do we think about sampling within qualitative research? Sampling is purposeful. So you are purposefully looking for someone who has had an experience in a particular issue, a phenomenon. So it's going to be purposeful, obviously. So it's non-random. You're not just going to go to engage with random people. Because when you do that, you might find that some of them have not had an experience, or they've got no knowledge of the question or the phenomenon that you're interested in. If you're interested in people's perspectives or perceptions on abortion, for example, or experiences, people who have experienced, let's say, a miscarriage, for example, you cannot do a random sampling because you're interested in the lived experiences of what it's like to have gone through that experience. So you become very purposeful in your selection. And then snowball. When we use snowball mostly if we do not have direct access to the community that we want to engage in, or because the people in that particular community or with that particular experience might know each other. So it might be easier for you as the researcher to be able to get access to them. And then in terms of quality control, because in the initial, many years ago, in the initial stages, the question was, but with quantitative, it's easy to be able to measure, to be able to check, but with qualitative research, how do you determine quality control? And of course, as researchers, we're always thinking, imagining, and looking at ways in which some of these questions or critiques can be answered. And so the steps towards quality control for qualitative research is trustworthiness, credibility, dependability, and confirmability, transferability. And the process in doing qualitative research, the important terminologies you should think about is this idea of emergent, reflexivity, audience, representation, rich descriptions. So these are the terminologies that you should know if you are a qualitative researcher. These are the terminologies that are very important for you as a qualitative researcher. So when you're working on your research methods section, either in your proposal or in your actual thesis or dissertation, you need to be able to engage your reader to show that you understand these things, right? So what are some of the sampling types? I've just indicated them. So we've got purposive sampling or convenient or convenience sampling. That which is available to you as the researcher, or those who are available to you as the researcher, but who've got that experience or knowledge that you require for the work that you're doing or for the research question that you have. Okay. And then snowball sampling is also a form of convenience sampling, but specifically then also engaging the participants to assist you to get access to more participants, right? You make initial contact with a person or a small group, and then that same group or that person, you ask them, you engage with them and request them to connect you with other contacts that have got similar or same experiences. And here there's a precautionary measure to say, when you're using snowball sampling, you must also be careful of unintended homogeneity. So if I've experienced a particular encounter in my life, I have a particular experience, it might be that the other people around me or the group that I'm aware of that have got similar experiences could be too, if you will, similar to me. Maybe they're also women, maybe they're also from the same area, maybe they're also, so you also need to, again, always be going back to your research question to say, what is it? What is the criteria? What is it that you are interested in? And that which you're interested in will then be able to assist you to determine who will be most appropriate for your research, who would be most appropriate to assist you to answer that research question. So you also don't want, for lack of a better word, sameness, right? Are you going to be able to get rich data from all these people that you are engaging with, right? So you also need to then be careful of homogeneity where it's just the same all the time. Okay. And so going back to that point on quality control, qualitative research, one of the researchers called Cavalli questioned the appropriateness of the Holy Trinity of science in qualitative research. And what has been used and what is being used in quantitative research is this idea of ensuring reliability. So the control measure within quantitative research is this reliable? Is this data valid? Is this data generalizable? So what is it that needs to be in place to ensure that this is valid, to ensure that this is reliable? And for a while at the beginning, there was this move towards trying to use the same quality control that are used in quantitative research in qualitative research as well. And of course, it was difficult because how do you really test validity in a way that it is tested within quantitative research? Of course, you want your data to be valid, but you need to understand it differently. What would validity look like within a qualitative research space? And this is when researchers then came up. And this is the beautiful thing about research, that we're always thinking, you're always questioning, you're always imagining. What are some of the ways in which we can also do quality control in qualitative research? Because at the end of the day, we don't do research for the sake of doing it. Research informs policy. Research leads to interventions. Research leads to rethinking of phenomena, right? So that we have to make sure that the work that you are doing has scientific merit in it. So what would that look like within a qualitative research space? And this is when researchers came up with this idea of saying, how can we establish trustworthiness? Right? Why should I trust this data? How should I trust this data? What is it that I can do to ensure that this data is trustworthy? And this is when the holy trinity of qualitative research, if you will, came about, that the work has to be credible, the work has to be transferable, the work has to be dependable and confirmable. Can you confirm this research? And these days, some of the journals even request for the data. I mean, you can have another conversation around that in terms of access to data and the promises that were made to the participants, and the consent and what was included in the consent and the consent form and how open we should make it. But some journals require a copy of or an extract of the data, the transcripts, so that they can be able to ascertain that indeed this research did take place, so that also perhaps the reviewer might also want to have a look at the data as well. All right, so that's some of the things that are being done. So what do these look like, or what do these mean? How do we establish trustworthiness? Under credibility, you can ensure credibility by prolonged engagement. So you're not going to go and interview a participant for 5 minutes and then say, no, I've gotten all the answers that I need, and therefore these answers are going to help me to answer my research question. So there has to be prolonged engagement. And of course, as we go on later on, this also goes into how you structure your interviews, how do you put together, how do you collect your data, right? So credibility is about prolonged engagement, and it's also about peer debriefing. So having others to also engage with your work, engage with your peers, right? So who else is reading your work and having a look? So as a student, you have your supervisor also looking at your work, and looking at your transcripts. And if you have someone that can also look at your data and then offer you feedback, you write your results and have someone to give you feedback or inputs. And member checking, which is also important. Do you go back to the participants? So credibility is also going back and saying, have I represented what you said correctly? Are you happy with what I've said about the encounter that I had with you, right? And transferability can happen if you provide thick descriptions. What was the criteria that you used? How, what the biographical information? What is the inclusion, exclusion criteria? In what area? What were you looking at? What did you focus on? So the thick descriptions assist me as another researcher in a different context. Maybe you did your research in one province and I'm situated in another province, and I read your work and I'm like, I wonder what these experiences are like for people in my province. So I ask similar questions, but I do the work in a different context, with a different history, perhaps with a different economic background, and say, how would this look like within this context? But if I want to do it based on the work that you did, you need to have provided the descriptions that will allow me to be able to almost do something similar to what you did. I'm reluctant to say a replication, as you would in quantitative work, but it affords you the opportunity to be able to say, based on reading this work, I get a sense of how the processes that were followed by this researcher, and I would like to do the same. And then dependability and confirmability, there has to be an audit trail. You can't say you conducted interviews, but there's no transcripts, or there are no transcripts, right? Where's the audio, if that was allowed? Where are your notes, right? Where is the raw data? There has to be an audit trail. When did you conduct the research? In which month, in which year, when, how, for how long was it? So that information, when you get to the results section of your work, think of it as telling this story, a narrative, inviting me as your reader to almost get a picture of the whole process of your research, right? That you interviewed people for 2 hours each, and the interviews took place in a restaurant, in their private home, in their workplace, so that you paint me this picture. They were between the ages of so and so, this is who was present. And then when you came in, you started with the introduction, you did this and that. So you provide an audit trail so that I know exactly what it is that happened and how you did it. So this is something that you really need to think about for your method section, as you explain to the reader how you went about collecting your data and the sampling and all of that. And then quickly on some qualitative research designs, there's quite a number of them. And you will see also there's also overlaps between these different research designs. So researchers are always thinking about different ways in which to do research. Yesterday, when we were talking about decolonization and indigenization, one of the things that we spoke about was the importance of dreaming, right? So how do you imagine conducting or collecting your data in a way that perhaps other researchers have not conducted or collected their data before, right? So how do you design your research? How do you go out into the community? How do you go out into the field, if you will, to collect your data? Is the ways in which research has been designed over the years still applicable to you, or is there a way that you can build on what already exists? And this is where innovation also comes through. This is where innovation also becomes possible as well. All right, so we've got the first one being grounded theory. Right? It can be tricky for some people, because often when you do your research, you rely on the literature to be able to tell you where are the gaps, what have others done, what questions have they asked, and what contribution is your work bringing? What is it that you are adding to the conversation? What is it that what solution are you coming up with within or on this different issue? So with grounded theory, the assumption is that others have not really grappled with this issue, right? Or there isn't a theory that really assists me to be able to have an understanding of this phenomena that I'm investigating. So we're often driven by what? You're often driven by the theory. So the theory determines the question, if you will, or the theory determines the methodology that you're going to be using. So what is it that's driving you in how you're collecting your data? So if you're saying you're using feminist theory, obviously you're interested in the ways in which women experience their reality, the inequalities that are there in society. And so this theory is going to offer you a lens with which to use. And this theory is also going to assist you in terms of the questions that you're going to be asking as well in the work that you're doing. Okay, so here with grounded theory, the idea is that you're going to generate theory from the ground. So you're not coming in with the theory. You're not saying I'm drawing from feminist theory. You're saying that there might be other theories that exist, but these theories are really insufficient. They do not assist me. They do not provide me the binoculars that I need to be able to see on the other side. And as a result, I am therefore going to develop my own theory. We have many theories today because scholars, researchers developed and came up with theories, right? And this has then assisted in us having so many theories that we have right now. Okay. You need a broad theory or explanation of a process. Current theories, as I've said, are inadequate or non-existent. So you are now saying, I'm doing research so that I can come up with a theory. So how do you do grounded theory? You collect the data. And as you collect the data, at the same time, you start analyzing the data and you start building on the theory as you are working with the data. So let's say, for example, you are doing interviews and you intend on conducting 15 interviews. Ordinarily, you would have all the interviews conducted. And after conducting these interviews, you would say, okay, how do I then look at the themes? What are the themes that are running through? What are the commonalities? What is the content that I have here? Right? But with grounded theory, you are now building the theory. You don't wait until you've conducted 15 interviews. You do one interview, and then with that interview, you start saying, okay, what's emerging here? What's happening? And then you start putting that down. And then from that data and from that interview, that informs how you go about with the next one. And so the process goes, right? So the next one informs how you engage with the next one and the next one. So all of them combined assist you at the end to then be able to say, okay, I've come up with a theory of understanding the politics of vaccines, for example, right? So that's what at the end of the day you will provide. And then when we do research in future, we can draw from your work and say, according to so-and-so, this is how we engage or understand the politics of vaccines, right? So what Glaser and Strauss suggest is that we should ignore existing theory, right? So because the existing theory is going to influence what it is that you're going to find, because it assists you to already have some idea in terms of the phenomena that you're looking at. So it's not sufficient, and it might also sway you in some ways. And therefore, with grounded theory, you just want to start from ground zero, if you will. And also because you've done a lot of literature review and you found that not so many people have done research on this. So there's little to no research that exists. But we know maybe 50 years or 100 years ago, we could make this claim, unless if it's something totally new in the world. But so many things, something that you think about, someone has probably thought about. So even if they've thought about it, how you are thinking about it might be different and you might come up with new solutions. They've thought about it, but maybe the solutions are still not sufficient. So that's why we continue doing research. That's why you're doing your master's and your PhD. Okay, and as I've indicated, you collect the data, you code, and you analyze concurrently. Okay, it's from the bottom up. So you reason, you put things together. At the end, you come up with a theory. There has been some criticisms around how we understand grounded theory. And Thomas and James have argued that it's really impossible to free ourselves from preconceptions in the collection and analysis of data. Because what grounded theory does, it says, don't be preoccupied with theory. Don't focus or read too much theory before you do the research, because it might influence how you look at your data and your information, right? And so Thomas and James says, yeah, but we cannot really free ourselves from the preconceptions in what we get from the data and how we analyze the data. These interpretations are affected by how we come into the research that we're doing as researchers. Okay, I hope that made sense. Ethnography. So ethnography is really one of the research designs that have been there for a very long time. And it's really about writing about people. This is something that anthropologists have done for a very, very, very long time. And what anthropologists have done was because they were interested in societies, in communities, in different cultures. And again, this was also part of the colonial conquest, to say, we are thinking of going to that part of the world, or we're thinking of going to that part of the world, or we are in this part of the world, but we want to understand these people that we've encountered here where we are, right? And so scholars and researchers, academicians have always been part of the colonial legacy as well. And the question has also been about how we think about the disciplines and where these disciplines come from. So ethnography was about understanding people, writing about people, the ethnic groups, the ethnos, right? And then graphy, as we know that root word, meaning writing. And we find a lot of ethnography as a design within anthropology and the sociology discipline. They are not only in those disciplines. You can be in another discipline, maybe political science, psychology, and still do ethnography, but mostly, or in the past, they were mostly found in these disciplines. That's where their roots are. And it's about understanding people, cultures over time. Anthropologists would go and stay with communities for a year, for 5 years, for 10 years, end up speaking the language, understanding the culture, writing about those cultures, getting an understanding of how people think, engage, their worldviews, and all of those, right? And then coming and theorizing on those, and also having those influencing some of the policies that were then made about people. So this history is also very important, that even as you take ethnography as a research design, what does that mean? And mostly it would be a single site. So as you can imagine, as a researcher, you cannot be running between different sites. It can be costly, but also it's not going to give you sufficient time to really get to understand fully the culture or group of people that you are interested in. So you engage in field work, you establish relationships, you reflect on your encounters. And this is just an example of the different communities, different people that exist in different contexts, in groups, that as an ethnographer you might be interested in, right? Look at the bottom right. For example, that's the marketplace. So a marketplace in a particular country, what is it? What is a typical what does a typical day in the marketplace look like? So you would spend, obviously, extended periods of time at the marketplace to get a deep understanding of what a typical day at the marketplace looks like. At the beginning of the month, in the middle of the month, at the end of the month, how do people engage and interact with each other at the marketplace? So your role as an ethnographer can happen at different levels or in different ways. So you can be a complete participant, where you really, really become part of the community, and they do not even know that you are a researcher. So this is what we call covert observer. So people do not know that you're a researcher. You go and you immerse yourself fully into the community. Or you can be a participant observer, where you observe. People know that you're a researcher, you are there for research, you are observing, but while you're observing, you're also participating in the activities that are happening. Right. And as I'm talking, you can also think of possibilities of different communities that one could be involved in, and sometimes even some of the possible ethical dilemmas that might be possible in these kinds of encounters of you as a researcher here. And then observer as participant. So here you are not really participating in the daily activities. You're mostly observing, but you are there all the time. Okay. And then last one, you are just observing. You are just observing. You do not interact with people. You do not interview anybody. So you observe and then you take note of what you are observing, and then you interpret and then may come to conclusions based on your observations of what you have seen within that particular community. And here's just one example of what this might look like. What kind of a typical ethnographic study research question. So here's one question. What are the underlying beliefs and traditions of an all-boys school? So as you can imagine here, if we were to go back, if you were a complete participant, so you can go enroll at the school, or with the agreements, perhaps with the school officials, and then participate in the school's activities, wanting to understand some of the beliefs and traditions. We all know some of the problematic traditions, or what may be deemed as problematic traditions or initiations within some of the schools, and maybe this is something you're interested in, and so for you to truly understand what's going on, then you go and you immerse yourself so that you experience what it's like to be in that space. So this could be your research question, and then you go and do this research. And then another research design is action research. And what does action research entail? It's a systematic inquiry of a particular practice with the aim to improve, right? So here at the core of this kind of research is that you are interested in an action. So the research that you're doing, at the end of the research, there has to be action that takes place. So you want to come up with an intervention, you want to come up with something that's going to be actionable, that people can do, that people can draw from, that people can put into action as a result of your research. Okay, so you do this because you want to empower, you want to emancipate, you want to transform. So bring about a particular change within a particular community. It can be something that's practical or participatory, where you work alongside and together with the community. And here, of course, at the core of it, it entails collaboration between you as the researcher and the participants that you're going to be engaging with. Sometimes this becomes tricky, especially when you come in as a researcher with already predetermined research questions and the direction where the research has to go. And of course, as a master's student or a PhD student, for you to have your proposal approved, all these things need to be in place, and for you to also be able to get ethical clearance. But this is one of the possible ways in which you can do your research. And if you really want to push the boundaries, which is possible, it is possible that you provide an overview in terms of how you would like your research, but also indicating that this is also dependent on your research collaborators or participants also having a voice in terms of the direction that the research is going to go or take place. Okay, so at the end of it, you're interested in seeing what action can be possible. So what is the plan of action at the end of this research? And this is cyclical, because you start at the beginning with the questions, with the hopes towards a particular action of empowerment, emancipation. So at the end, you want to see, have people being empowered? Has there been a change? Is there something that has been actioned as a result of my research, right? It might not be actioned by you, but maybe by the community itself, based on the research that you've done or done with them. And so it's cyclical. At the end, you say, did it work? Did it not work? How do we then start again? Or how do we move from where we ended? Okay, and this is just an example of the research cycle for action research, where it starts with identifying the problem. And so who decides on what the problem is? Hence, I'm saying sometimes it would be difficult as graduate students to be able to say, I would like to identify the problem together with the community. But I would also like to challenge you to say, it is possible to identify an issue and say how this is going to be shaped, or the kinds of actual questions or actions that are going to be taken place, and the end intervention is going to be collectively decided upon. You know, when you do your research, and when you're done with your research, you have your last chapter, your conclusion chapter, where you would say, these are the policy implications. These are the recommendations based on my research. And what action research does, is that it challenges you. Whose recommendations are these? Are these your recommendation as the researcher, or are these the recommendations based on the collective engagement with the community or participants that you had when you were doing your research, right? And this is just the cycle that you can imagine. And then another research design that you could consider is phenomenology. And phenomenology really is about what reality is and our experience of reality. So phenomenology is about saying, how do people experience the world, right? Do I see in this picture two hands interlocking, or am I seeing a rabbit? So you, where you sit and you can say, I'm seeing a rabbit. And then someone else can say, no, I'm seeing fingers interlocking and making a shape. So the experience of reality is very different for each person. Does that mean your reality, what you see, is false, and what I see is false? Is there a rabbit in this picture? Or is it just fingers or hands? So my experience of reality in terms of what I see is valid as much as your experience of reality in terms of what you see is also valid. And that's what phenomenology argues for. Okay. It's focused on the subjective experience of individuals or group. So my subjective experience of what I observe, what I see, is then my reality. It is something that is personal. It's how I experience the world, right? And not necessarily relationships between people, but how I experience the world vis-a-vis how the next person also experiences the world. And we might experience the world the same way or separately. And how we experience the world obviously is influenced by the many things that I've already indicated from the beginning of this lecture today, right? The history, the social interactions, the culture, all of those things will determine how I experience reality. If I've never seen a rabbit in my life, if I don't know what a rabbit is or what a rabbit looks like, chances are when I look at that picture, I would not say I'm seeing a rabbit because it's not part of my frame of reference, right? My frame of reference determines how I understand the world. And so it really offers an in-depth engagement and understanding of people's realities. And that's why the sample would be small and very purposive in terms of what phenomena you're interested in. Okay. And here it's just a summary in terms of how the phenomenology can be understood, right? It's about the structure of the consciousness, people's thoughts, right? What people think about things, about reality, what people remember, how people carve their memories, in people's imagination and how they use it. Again, what my imagination tells me that this is a rabbit, someone can see it as something else, and how then that informs what becomes real for me and what is not real. It's about the desires that we have as people. It's about our emotions and how these influence how we engage with each other, how we engage with the world, right? And very also acknowledging how experience is embodied. So it's also about the embodied experience of people. Okay, and here's an example again of a research question that you can imagine. So if you were to say, if I'm doing a phenomenological study, what might my research question look like, right? And so a research question could be, what are the experiences of Black teachers working in former white schools, right? So these are spaces that for a long time were not open, maybe to someone like you. And so now I'm interested in the ways in which you are encountering this space. I'm interested in the ways in which you're imagining this space. I'm interested in the ways in which you are experiencing being within a context that was very different in the past. What does it look like? What does it mean for you? What are your experiences being in an environment that was formerly only for white people only, right? So you're interested in that phenomenon. So then a person will give you very in-depth encounter of their experience of working within such an environment. So that could be a possible research question that one might want to think about. And then historical research, to describe and examine events of the past, and the ideas that you want to understand the present and anticipate potential future effects. There's also there's this saying that says, if we ignore our past or do not understand our past, we are bound to repeat, right? If the mistakes of the past, if we do not have that understanding, we might repeat those mistakes. I make an example of what we experienced with COVID-19. Many people were not even aware of the Spanish flu that happened in 1918. And so that history, when 2020 hit, 2019, 2020 hit, now there was a lot of talk about the Spanish flu. This was brought into people's imagination and consciousness, something that they might not have been aware of or thought about before. So what is it about history that can assist us to be able to understand our present, right? So those who are in history and interested in historical facts would be looking at the various forms of resources. So you would look at the archives, you would look at the private libraries, the papers. There's a lot of history that people might not be aware of. We were talking yesterday about the Euro-Western forms of knowledge production, of education, and how that universalist, monolithic way of understanding the world has meant other ways and forms of knowing have been relegated to the margins. So if we are to imagine a pluriversal or multiple epistemologies, then it means we also have to go and dig in the past so that we can get an understanding and learn some of the things that were rendered useless, for example. And this also becomes very relevant even as we think about critical and pressing things such as climate change, for example, right? What can we learn from history? Okay. And then I think this will be the last one that I do, and then I will pause here for today and take your questions and comments, because I'm also interested in how you're also imagining some of this applying in your own research, but also thinking about already the kinds of the research design that you're using, or how you are applying qualitative methods, and how you are now reflecting on your own work based on some of the conversations that we're having tonight, based on the lecture that I'm giving tonight. So I'll just pause with the case study, and then likely we have another session, and then we can continue tomorrow where we left off. So what is a case study? A case study focuses on one phenomenon, right? You are interested in one phenomenon because you want to understand this phenomenon in depth, right? It can be a specific instance. So cases can be different things. So they can manifest in different ways. So it can be a particular instance, right? That can assist you to get a general principle on a particular issue. So when you go for a case study, research design, it's because you're interested in the uniqueness of that case, or you want to look at that case and say, how is it similar, or what are the commonalities between this case and another case, for example, right? So you can't, there are different reasons why you might be interested in looking at different case studies. And a case can be a group. So you can use a group of people as a case study. You can look at a person as a case study. So what is it that is interesting? What is it that is unique? What is it that stands out about this person that you would like to have a look at them as a case study for us to understand whatever issue that you would like to put to the forefront for us to engage in, right? Or it can be an entity such as a school, or it can be a university, or it can be a classroom, and there's something unique about that classroom, or it can be a particular program that exists, and you want to get an in-depth understanding of that program. Or it can be an event. Maybe there's an annual festival of something, and you're interested in what is it that this event aims to do, who does it draw, what does it achieve, why was it put together or constructed in the first place. So all of those things are very, very important. Okay, so that's how you then put together a case. I've indicated that it's one phenomenon, right? And you want to understand in depth. It can be an instance. And you are looking at a particular context. So a particular moment in time, a particular time. And so you're looking at a context, and this context is real life, right? So setting the case for a historical, a physical, or an economic setting, right? So what are the features? What are the features of case studies? Particularistic, right? So that's why you're interested in that particular case study. So it's very, very particular. You're interested in a particular situation. It's heuristic, right? It illuminates the reader's understanding of a phenomenon. Oh, okay, I've always wondered why this event happens at this time of the year, and it is happening. And then through that understanding, it brings a renewed understanding or meaning to people that they might not have had before, right? And then descriptive. All right. So at the end, you want to have this rich, thick description. Remember at the beginning when we were talking about the importance of thick descriptions in qualitative research, and provides the complexities of the situation. And here's a quick example. Why do some township schools achieve high academic results despite sharing the same resource challenges as others? So you identify a particular school which has got challenges with resources, but even with that, it receives 100% pass mark. But then we know that the continuing narrative is that many township schools are struggling, are suffering, and as a result, the marks are affected because of this lack of resources. But then you come and you say, here's this unique situation or case of this school that has achieved so much, even though they also, like other schools in the townships, do not have resources. So you want to get an understanding of what it is that they're doing, or that they're doing differently. What have they put in place? What kind of support mechanisms? What are the secret weapons, if you will, right? So your research will look into those things. And of course, with the findings of your research, we might actually be able to find something that we can draw from, that perhaps other township schools can also use, so that they also improve their marks as well, even though they do not have resources. Yes, the schools must have resources. Yes, we're holding the government accountable, but sometimes change and resources coming from above takes a very long time. They're very slow, but in the meantime, the learners need support, and they need to be productive and to excel. So what is it that this school is doing, even without that support, that maybe other schools can do as well? And so through your research, through this case study that you've done, we might be having an answer to this question that many people might be having. So this is an example of a case that you can then use and put forward to say, based on this case, here are some of the things that we can consider, some of the things that we can think about. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for tonight, and then spend the next few minutes focusing on some of the questions that you might have. And then, of course, as I said, we will be continuing as soon as again tomorrow. Okay. All right. My question is, hello, Anonymous. My question is, what is the sample size for one qualitative research? For example, what number of focus group discussions or key in-depth interviews or observations, etc.? I don't know what just happened to my screen. All right. And let me come back so that you can see me as well. So within qualitative research, this is an ongoing question, really, to say what number is the acceptable number in qualitative research. And this is something that we're also going to cover tomorrow. But I think just a quick response for you is that many researchers have done the studies and have agreed that 12 is the number that is acceptable for doing qualitative research interviews, that if you have 12 interviews, that is acceptable. Of course, you can have more, but what you need to think about and what's important is reaching the point of saturation. And maybe you can reach the point of saturation at number 9 or maybe at number 14. So at what point do you get to start realizing that, okay, the answers that I'm getting from my participants are starting to sound the same? So that's when you know you've reached saturation. But Anonymous, we're going to pay close attention to that question tomorrow. But I hope my answer is sufficient for now. That literature says 12 is the number. So when you decide on the number of participants for your own research, you can even draw from the research and say that research shows that 12 is the number that is acceptable, where one can say you can safely say you've reached saturation. Okay. Hi, Melinda. If I'm going to use a mixed methods, then would it mean that I have to outline both positivist and constructivist paradigm? Yes, Melinda. If you're going to be using both qualitative and quantitative research methodologies, then yes, because you need to justify. So for each methodology that you use, you have to tell us as your readers, you're using qualitative research because 1, 2, and 3. You're using quantitative research because 1, 2, and 3. So you'll then explain to us that I'm going to be using a mixed methods where I'm going to draw from quantitative research methods because it's going to assist me to be able to do 1, 2, and 3, right? I'm interested in predicting. I'm interested in looking at a broader overview or lens where I can generalize. I'm interested in looking at the correlation, right? But at the same time, I'm also interested in understanding the experiences of people on this particular phenomena. Right. And as a result, I'm also going to be conducting interviews. I'm also going to be doing maybe 2 focus groups. I'm also going, so depending on what it is that you're going to be doing from the qualitative research side. So you then just have to explain to your reader how you're bringing these two together and how they go and why you're bringing them together. So do you have to outline? Yes, you have to outline both. Okay. I've employed, hello Tapelo, I've employed Afrocentric paradigm in my research and realized you did not cover it on your presentation. Tapelo, okay. I engaged yesterday on the broader epistemological issues around knowledge production, and Afrocentricity would fall under your constructivist critical paradigm, and as you know, it's one of the emerging paradigms that we are now using and putting at the forefront as a way of understanding the world as well, right? Using Afrocentricity. So, and we use it and apply it both as an epistemology, as a way of understanding what knowledge production is, how we come to know, but not as a standalone, right? Because Afrocentricity also even comes through in the methods that we're using. Right, and this is something that I think Mulifikete Asante also speaks about as well, that we don't understand it only as a method, but it's all encompassing. It's at the same time a theory, because we also use it as a lens to understand, but we then use it also as a theory. So it's all encompassing, and that's why I did not cover it as a unique standalone paradigm, because in some ways then it diminishes it, right? I think it's a paradigm in much a different way. It is broader. And your question was saying, is it different from emancipatory paradigm? Absolutely not. And that's exactly what I'm saying, right? So that when you look at the emancipatory paradigm, within the emancipatory paradigm, critical paradigm is the Afrocentric paradigm, because that's what it aims to do. But that's not the only thing that it aims to do. So it's emancipatory in nature, because it forces us, it requires us to center the African way of being, of doing and understanding the world, so that from an Afrocentric perspective, how we understand reality and epistemologies. So all of that would form part of the emancipatory paradigm. You're absolutely correct, Taper. Thank you. Hello, Musa. How advisable is using convenience sampling for purposes of bringing forth excellent research which can be used for future researches and interventions? Musa, I'm going to ask that you rephrase rather your question again. I don't understand. How advisable is using convenience sampling for the purposes of bringing forth excellent research which can be used for future research and interventions? I'm so sorry, Musa. I'm going to ask that you type your question again for me. I'm not sure I understand it. Okay, anonymous. Should dependability and confirmability always be discussed together, or are they different concepts that can be separate? You can discuss them separate. They are related, so that's why I just put them together. They're related, but you are more than welcome to discuss them separately, anonymous, right? So your data has to be dependable, but at the same time, it has to be confirmable. So they are not interchangeable, but they are related. So you're more than welcome to discuss them as different concepts. Would a mixed method be advised at master's level using structured interviews and surveys, or is it better to use one approach? Anonymous, as I said, it all depends on what you are interested in your research, right? So it doesn't matter whether you are at the master's level or a PhD level. You can use mixed methods at master's level. You can use mixed methods at PhD level. You can use one method at master's or just one method at PhD. So the level of your study should not be a determinant of whether to use qual, quant, or mixed methods, okay? Be directed by your research question. Be directed by the hypothesis if you have a hypothesis. So what is it that you are interested in finding out? That will then lead you to be able to say, would it make sense, therefore, to only do qualitative, do interviews? Will that assist me to fully answer my question? Or would it make sense to also do surveys so that this other layer or layers can also be answered as well? In the interpretation and discussion of the findings and using thematic analysis, can one use numbers to highlight the number of participants who indicated having had a similar experience to a certain question? Sometimes I always shy away from using numbers in that way, because the numbers do not really provide the kind of data in the way that it provides data in qualitative research, right? The number of participants who indicated having had a similar experience. You can definitely say, yes, 4 of the 7 participants indicated that this is indeed the case for them. And then only 2 of the 10 participants actually related to this matter, what. You can absolutely say that, anonymous, right? And remember, we also interested in the thick descriptions and the excerpts, right? So you can say 5 of the participants actually agreed that this and that and the other, as can be seen in one of their expressions here, or one of the things that they said, and then maybe draw from 1 or 2 of their experiences. But a simple answer, can you use numbers? Yes, you can use numbers. You can say 4 of the participants said this, but for 4 of the participants, this was not relevant for them. 3 of the participants did this and that and that. But do not only do that, because within qualitative research, we're also interested, you're talking about thematic, and in the analysis, we're interested in your meaning making, right? So do not just stop there. Do not just say 3 indicated 1, 2, and 3. What does that mean, therefore, for us, right? As people who are reading. In the interpretation and discussion, okay, same question. What is the sample size for one qualitative research? What number? Okay, that's that question we've already done. It was about what number of participants should one have when doing qualitative research. What is the acceptable number? And I've indicated that 12, as research tells us, but I'll discuss more tomorrow, because that does not always apply in every circumstance. It again depends what kind of research you're doing and who your participants are as well. Okay. You're doing a qualitative study, Mpho, on nurses' perception of well-being during COVID. I need clarity on the epistemologists also. they're all the same: key, knowledge, reality, and truth. You need clarity on the epistemology. Yes, epistemology is about the knowledge, right? It's about how we come, what is it, how do we come to decide on what counts as knowledge? I hope I'm understanding you correctly as I try to go back to that slide for you. Yes, so you're saying that under epistemology, yes. So I said epistemology is about the knowledge, né? How and what do we understand and come to know as knowledge, and what influences that knowledge, and what determines the truth, right? So what determines the truth is the social context and the social interaction and experiences of the participants. So yes, knowledge, reality, and truth are all interconnected and very important and interlinked when we're looking at epistemology, right? They're not all the same. They're not all the same. One feeds off each other. So how do I explain it in a way that does not confuse you, Mpo? Okay, so epistemology is about how we come to know and what is accepted as knowledge, right? And hence that example of the Euro-Western knowledge has always been understood and accepted as the knowledge. So that was the epistemology. And the argument is that there are multiple epistemologies. So there are different ways of being and understanding the world. So this knowledge, the truth, is dependent on people's experiences. The truth is dependent on people, how people view reality. So all of those then determines what epistemology would then be put forward. I hope I'm making sense. So you're looking at the nurses and their perceptions of well-being. Things were messed up during COVID. What was that like for them, right? So these particular nurses in a particular context at a particular time. So the nurses in Gauteng or the nurses in South Africa, perceptions of well-being might not necessarily be the same as those of nurses, or the nurses in the private hospitals. South Africa is a good example. Private hospitals and public hospitals might not be the same. So and therefore the reality, or what they perceive as the truth of the impact and the influence and how people were affected by COVID might not necessarily be the same, right? And therefore the knowledge, therefore, that they would come to know, the knowledge that their reality would be different based on those experiences that they have. So knowledge, reality, and truth, are they all the same? No, they're not all the same. They are all interlinked, interconnected. But at the end of the day, they're all about how we come to understand epistemology, which then encompasses all of these things. All right? Ethical clearance. Who applies for ethical clearance? You, okay. You apply for ethical clearance as soon as your proposal has been accepted. So anyone whose proposal has been accepted can apply for ethical clearance. You need that letter that says you successfully completed before you can apply. Is it a supervisor on behalf of the student, or is it the student? No, it's you as the student. There's even now an online portal where you submit your application yourself. The supervisor supports your ethical application, your ethics application. So when you've done everything online, me as the supervisor, I get a link that then takes me to your application so that I can have a look at it and check whether I'm happy or not, or give you feedback. And if I'm happy, I then sign and I approve, then it goes to the ethics committee. Okay, great. Submission of an article before graduation. Yes, that is a requirement. I'm not sure what the question is there. Okay, Anonymous, I'm glad you were sorted based on the presentation. Okay, Ephraim, these slides are going to be shared through the CGS office, so you can engage with the information on the slides there, and you'll see I've indicated some of the sources, the researchers, so you can just read from there. I think what I'll also do in future is maybe also even have a reference list at the end in case you want to go and check some of those sources. But otherwise, for now, I have the names of the authors and the year of publication, so you can go and check for yourself. Okay. Oh, in previous, we were advised that mixed method is not advisable. Well, Clive, it's always a tricky one. It depends. It depends. It depends on the research that you're doing, and what it is that you want to find out. As I said, you can just do qualitative, you can just do quantitative. You need to have a good reason why you're doing mixed methods. It is important to also do mixed methods. I've explained why we ended up having what we call mixed methods because of these paradigm wars over centuries or over decades, and that's why we have them now. So it's an option that is there for you as students, but not a must. It's a discussion and an engagement that each student needs to have with their supervisor to look at what would be meaningful and make sense for your research, but always taking your hypothesis or research question into mind. Effectiveness of using convenience samplings for conducting research that can contribute to future researchers and interventions. Hi, Musa. I don't know. Maybe you should send me an email and we should have a conversation. I still don't understand your question. I do apologize. Effectiveness of using convenience sampling for conducting research that can contribute to future researchers, and interventions. I do apologize that I'm not sure how to answer this one. Okay, please send me an email and we can discuss it further. For PhD, yes, no, absolutely. You can only do individual interviews. That is absolutely acceptable at a PhD level. But if you want to broaden the work that you're doing, you can triangulate. You can use individual interviews, you can use focus groups together. So you're using individual interviews because you're interested in lived realities or experiences. You're using focus groups because you're also interested in perceptions, right? A broader understanding, and also interested in how people, when they're together, look at a particular phenomenon. You must not do it because you think, oh, at PhD level it will make sense because I'm at an advanced level. I need to use triangulation. I need to use more forms of data collection. No, it should not only be for that. It should be because it's going to contribute towards strengthening the research that you're doing. Okay, all right. Organization in which I'm trying to introduce lean management to optimize operational efficiency. I wonder whether you can elaborate on this and whether we can also revisit this tomorrow. Lean management to optimize, because I would need more information that what exactly is it specifically that you want to do, that you want to find out. Yes, you want to introduce lean management so that you optimize operational efficiency. Yes, that's your topic. But what is it that you're looking at, right? I can hear what it is that you want to achieve, but what is it that you're looking at? All right. All right, I think we're going to stop here for tonight. If I did not answer your question, I'm not seeing any more questions. You still have the opportunity to ask your questions tomorrow. But also, you can send through your questions to my colleagues. And then maybe before we start tomorrow's session, we can deal with your questions and then continue with the session tomorrow, because it's still the session on qualitative research. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow again. Goodbye.